Hi and welcome to Homo Ludens, the channel on history and board games. And today we are in for an awesome interview with Reiner Knizia, legendary Eurogame designer. And you might be surprised, why is Reiner Knizia coming on Homo Ludens, the channel on history and board games? He's not a war gamer, he's not a historical gamer. And I thought it would be interesting because I think that Reiner Knizia, as a designer, uses history quite often in his design. And I'm also a big fan of his work. But the brain behind this encounter was Luis Aguasvivas, that you've seen in other content of mine, and we've been collaborating on this interview too. And it was your idea, Luis. You wanted to the two of us to actually meet and discuss and talk. And I thought it would be great to have you maybe providing a bit more context before we jump into the Reiner Knizia interview around what you wanted to achieve with this discussion.
Well, first of all, thank you, Fred, for allowing me the opportunity to use you as a guinea pig for this. Homo Ludens, as everybody knows, is a channel of history and board games. But usually focusing more on specifically on like how historical topics or events are portrayed / simulated in games. But there's a lot more to history than that. There's also the history of game design, and specifically also how Euro game designers also use history, which we're going to touch on that during the interview, and then probably a little bit later in our talk as well, you and I, Fred. But I wanted for you to talk to probably the best known designer working in the analog game space, and you're a designer in your own right. You have some games that you have published, games that you will publish in the future. But I mean, compared to Reiner Knizia, you are a baby. You are yet but an infant. So so that perspective in regarding design. Obviously, both of you have this different approaches to comes to games. I mean, he makes games that are at their core accessible to a larger audience, not necessarily just only like in theme, but then also in mechanics. You come from the vein of historical game simulations, which even sometimes at the most simple, which your games somewhat fall under, are still relatively complex for the general audience. So that juxtaposition I thought would be fairly interesting to do. Also, I just wanted to do some work relating with Reiner Knizia. At my point, I think he's the best designer in my opinion. He's the one that I have very little issues when it comes to trying to get his games on the table. No matter the demographic, no matter the age group.
And it's the same for me, and that's why when you reached out, I was so excited. But I guess let's jump into the interview, and then we'll come back to debrief with Luis on the discussion I had with Reiner Knizia. Enjoy. Hi, Reiner Knizia. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. I'm Fred Serval, the host of this show, and a beginner designer focusing on historical board games. In our conversation today, I'd like to get a bit of your wisdom to inspire me as a designer, but also explore the ways in which you sometimes integrate historical elements into your own game design and know more about your creative process. And maybe I would like to start from the beginning. I was wondering what initially sparked your interest in designing board games. Was there a particular moment or a specific game that inspired you to start creating your own?
There wasn't a specific moment and there wasn't a particular game. I think the wonderful thing in our industry is that we come from many different backgrounds, but we all come with a love for the games. So I loved playing games, and I grew up in a small town in southern Germany, and so I got more ambitious to find the games to play, and I started designing my own ones because just I loved playing.
I was wondering, what were some of the biggest challenges you faced when you started designing games?
There weren't really these challenges. I mean, I was very enthusiastic and my initial ambition was very small. I wanted to have fantastically exciting games for me, which I wanted to play with my friends. I then started to become a little bit more ambitious and sent games which were totally unfit for publishing to some publishers until I actually reconsidered and said, okay, what do I need to do to get published? And I became more serious about it and made proper prototypes, wrote up proper rules, and really looked at what do the publishers actually want, not what do I want, and find the right publishers for the right games. And once I got more serious, it then went very quickly. I published in the first year 2 games and 1 book about games. And then it went from there very quick with more and more games.
Did at time you find it frustrating to actually start thinking more about what designers wanted more than what you wanted? Did you feel like sometimes there was a bit of a conflict here?
Frustration is not the word which springs to mind at all, because I did that as a hobby, and I did that because I loved my hobby, and because I just said, I'll try it out. I have so many ideas, I have so many games already worked out, and I'll try it out. And of course, it's then a learning phase to see how you actually operate with the publishing companies, and the learning is fun as well. So it's we know as game designers that we mostly get rejected, not as a person but as the games, and that's very natural. So that's part of the learning and part, if you want, of the fun.
I was looking at your BGG listing before starting this interview, and I could see 700 games listed. You've been active for almost 30 years now. And I was wondering, do you feel like, looking back at your career, that there are kind of like an artist, phases of shifts in your career, like big moments that you had as a creator?
I think, yes, there are certain phases. As I pointed out initially, I just wanted to play and among my friends, so I leave that as the pre-phase. And then I was lucky enough to be quite successful from the start onwards, and actually win the German Game Prize with Modern Art. That opened a lot of doors, that made me more well known, which helps, of course, marketing more of the games. It helps you getting in contact with people. And I think I was kind of spot on with what people wanted in the 90s. So a lot of the classics, which are still republished today, were created in the 90s, like Euphrates and Tigris, or Samurai, or Taj Mahal, Ra. There's lots of these which have survived the time. And then I think there was a phase where, in the beginning of the 2000s, where I looked at building more than an individual game. That means building whole families and brands, which of course help then to market the individual game. So that is, if you want, a second phase. And then I think in the recent years, I'm more and more trying to reach lots of people. So I have kind of given up a little bit the complexity of the games, and I'm trying to make games simple, not simplistic, but still very exciting for a lot of people. And to add a bit more to my long answer, that also meant that I've taken game modern and more now more searched for game mechanisms which are different from the 90s, and I can't rest on my laurels for the 90s. So taking these more modern game mechanisms, and which are sometimes very complex, and try to open them up for the wider public. For example, with El Dorado, we did that with the deck building game, and with My City, we did that for
the legacy aspect.
The legacy aspect of the game. And so that's something which fascinates me, to see how many people can I reach and bring enjoyment to the people.
And it's really interesting to actually see in your career that you adapt to trends. So you were talking about My City and the legacy, El Dorado and the deck building. Are there aspects of like trends in game designs and specific mechanics that you get excited by and want to explore with at the moment?
Well, I think the longer you stay in a career, the more important it becomes that you reinvent yourself, and as I already mentioned, that you don't rest on any laurels which you may have acquired. So for me, the most exciting project is always when I am forced to leave the trodden paths and to leave my design methodology, which I'm trying to avoid to have one. So, for example, when the mobile games came up, I was forced to look at the little screens, and you cannot explain games, the rules. So how do you do this? And when electronics, one of our most best-selling games is Who Was It? The electronic game. So it's still a game where you sit around the table, but you have an electronic box which gives the atmosphere. It is a cooperative game. So that was a very new challenge, what to do with this. Or when I was actually briefed to do a Lord of the Rings game, I read the Lord of the Rings and I said, well, the viewpoint of the book, and the fans of the book will expect that from a Tolkien game, that we are the fellowship. That's the viewpoint of the reader. We are the fellowship. So I cannot, as Sam, take a club and put it over Frodo's head to get the ring. We are together. So it was inevitable to create a cooperative game, which was again a new challenge at that time. Cooperative games were essentially not known as serious games. And these challenges are the main thing I'm looking for and I'm enjoying, because they force me to be innovative.
And I was wondering, so as a young designer, I always keep a small notebook with me because I sometimes have game ideas that come at any point, but sometimes very at unfortunate moments where I don't really have time to think about those things, but it sparks in my mind.
Yes.
And I was wondering, do you have anecdotes of moments where you actually came up with a game idea that was unexpected and a bit unusual?
So yes, it's the same with me. I only wear shirts with pockets, and I always, whenever I leave my desk, I have my little note sheet in there and my pencil. There are moments, to answer your question, where you essentially have an insight, and as you say, as a designer, as an artist, you live what you do, and that means you always keep your eyes open, whatever you do, for new ideas, for new inspirations. And I remember one very specific instance where I saw the game Tutankhamun. Tutankhamun, for those people who don't know it, is essentially let me start differently. When I was at the museum in Munich, at the Egyptian Museum, I saw a picture of Egypt. And I saw, well, there's nothing really there apart from the long meandering Nile and all the cultural buildings and things along the Nile. So in an instant, I saw the game and I said, okay, I will lay out randomly a lot of tiles, that's in Tutankhamun, and these tiles represent different cultural achievements, different things you may want to collect. And you have a figure and you walk along the Nile, but you can go as far as you want. So there's no dive. You can go as far as you want, but you can never come back. So if you're greedy and try to get the very good tiles, which are a bit further down the river, then you jump there, but then later you run out of more possibilities because you gave up all the first part of the path. If you're too slow, then the other people will pick everything away from you in front of you. And this, together with very interesting graphics and how you combine the things you're picking up, was essentially the game I saw. Doesn't mean that the game was then finished. Of course, you have to test it and fine-tune it. But that was one of these moments where you see a game where you have an insight for a whole game. Of course, when we design games, we have a lot of testing, a lot of thinking about the games, and we get lots of little insights, helpful insights, which we're not even aware. But that's the normal way of meandering and finding our ways and testing things out and fine-tuning.
Yeah, of course, there is often a gap between having the idea and executing on it, like how it actually works in. But it's a great transition to another topic that I wanted to talk. So I really like this idea of being in a museum and suddenly getting an idea for a game based on something that you're exposed to, an historical moment. Because throughout your career, you had a series of games that appeared that clearly had historical theme. And I was wondering, what's your relationship with history? Do you often get inspired by it to make games? How does it Like, how does Reiner Knizia, the designer, get inspired by history, and what makes you want to make a game about a specific historical event?
I love history. I love museums, and I love looking at historic epochs. And the Egyptian history is actually, the ancient Egypt is actually my favorite history, if I may say so. Lots of great achievements have been done in history, but the relevance for the games is multifold. Firstly, you have a clear setting, you have an inspiration, you can read about it, and you can get a lot of food for thought out of this historic period. But one other advantage is that people are familiar with it. So if people see a pyramid, to go back to Egypt, a pyramid on the cover, and maybe the game is called something that you're a pharaoh in Egypt, you know your role, you know exactly the setting, you know if it inspires you as the player, as the buyer. So there's little to explain. And as you know, we are standing in front of a big shelf as the buyer, and we need to decide what game we want. So the game must communicate very, very quickly what it is about. And history has a common understanding for us, and therefore not only, but history is a good access to communicate what the game is about, and people then have a natural understanding about their role, and that worked very nicely together with my love for the history.
And sometimes you were talking about common understanding of history, and sometimes we see this in history and on specific events. Common understanding is sometimes false or not accurate, like not accurate based on the actual state of research. Do you feel like sometimes games can be an opportunity to challenge conceptions, like general conceptions from the preconceptions from the general public? Can it be a way also to convey better historical understanding or a bit more nuance?
I don't actually see that as my mission. My mission is to bring enjoyment to the people. And of course, I would not pick up any contentious themes like slave trade or so in a game, or bloodshed and glorifying of cruelty. We don't need that in a game. In a game, I can transfer good feelings, nice things in there. But my mission is not to lift the finger and say, okay, but you have to understand that properly. And it's not an educational mission. Of course, I do educational games. That's something very different. But the mission is really to give people fun and a good, stimulating time with each other. And therefore, I actually am quite happy to deviate with my story from the actual history and make it nice for the game and have different focus and different stresses than the history had it. History was sometimes very cruel, and it's just creating a nice atmosphere. I am not the person who have to write and teach the world about what is good and what is not good.
Good. And now, maybe to conclude, I would like to talk about Reiner Knizia, the player. And I was wondering, apart from working on your own creations, what are the kind of games that you like playing as a player?
That's a good question, because it has changed. I think most of the game designers, if not all, start with designing their favorite type of games. And that were what I mentioned in the 90s, the more complex games, the strategy games, which I loved and which I did. And then when I started to say, I don't want to just dig deeper in this one genre, I started to do children's games, I started to do little dice games and card games. And with each of these genres, you learn a lot about game design, which then cross-fertilizes the other games as well. Our times have changed, and our games are a mirror of our times, and the time has become much more hectic, much faster. Nobody has time anymore. Nobody has the time to read rules. And this is the same for me. Rather than sitting down for 2-3 hours and playing one game, I'd rather take out the game and play it for half an hour, enjoy it, get a quick entry into it, have quick success, quick fun, and then try to do something else. However, there is a problem. I have so many games on the go that whenever I get some victims to play, and of course we have many organized play sessions throughout the week, we would always play the prototypes. So it is very rare that I would actually play a game which is not be designed by me. Not because I think my games are so wonderful and better than anything else. It's just each game takes a lot of test sessions, and my favorite games are always the ones I'm currently working on. So unless one of my playtesters, one of the playtesters around me, the friends, bring one, as they did with Dominion, and say, you need to play this. Then El Dorado came out many years later for that. So, of course, I cannot be blind to what is going on in the world. But on the other hand, I'm also trying not to get too much influenced by specific ideas from designers, because once you know an idea, it is very hard to have your own solution for this specific point. And when we create games, we have to take many decisions. And if I don't know, it is much easier for my brain to come up with a natural one. Once you know a solution, you seem to be so focused on this one solution, you can't think freely anymore. So with this respect, what does Reiner Knizia play today? We play the games I'm currently designing, but these games are mostly for the wider public. Or when we, for example, when we bring back one of our classic games, which has frequently happened in the recent years, to Kickstarter, then we try to do some expansions to it. We try to do something extra, and then we would intensively play it again. One of the games down here, I think I can mention that, Taj Mahal, is here. We have played that yesterday again, and we'll play it tonight again. And we are building some extra elements to this classic game, and then hopefully soon people will be able to enjoy that.
Yeah, but that's great to hear. Maybe one last question, because I realized that we were over time. There was so many more questions I wanted to ask, but that's fine. Maybe for another time. You've been in the hobby for quite some time. You've influenced also the hobby quite significantly with your own design. Looking ahead at the next decade, what do you see in the future of board gaming? A lot of people are saying that we're living a golden age, and it's true. There is a lot of production, there is a lot of new publishers. But what do you, from your perspective, what are your predictions, but also hopes for the future of the hobby?
I think the best answer I can give here, yes, I may be an expert in games. But I'll tell you what I did. When Richard Garfield, who invented Magic, showed me his game before it was published, I told him to forget about it. It will never fly. And it became a world success and made him a multimillionaire, actually created a whole industry of collectible card games. So that's how much you can trust people with experience, or the so-called experts. I don't know. I have no idea where this industry is going. If you look back just the recent years with the pandemic and with the wars and everything going on, and the supply chains being interrupted, we don't know where we're going. What I know is that our games will always reflect our life. Digitalization has been there. Globalization has influenced very much, making games more losing their characteristic cultural personality, which is a shame. And maybe we come back to this again. So it is very difficult to say. If I knew, I could probably act accordingly. But I also think it is kind of a random process. You know, when I've seen that so often, when one of the games, for whatever reason, possibly through lucky circumstances, becomes very successful, then all the publishers jump on this type of genre, and suddenly it becomes a self-made success. And if the publishers have in their mind, oh, these types of games do no longer work, now the publishers say the roll and write games have had their time, so they're very hesitant to take something new. And then that means this genre will be no longer successful. So it's also self-made where we are going. And who knows what the next success will be, what is the top game for the next year, and then we'll spark more trends to it. It just makes a little idea, it just takes one little spark. And I'm not calling Magic or collectible card games a little spark, but I'm saying just takes one of these things and the whole industry will float somewhere else. So trying to predict sitting here and saying, I know, or this will be happening is just irresponsible. And so I think being honest and say, look, I don't know, and that keeps it exciting.
Yes.
Is the best I can say, and that means we are all in the same boat, and we're all contributing to the future.
Yeah, that's good to hear. One last question, very short. It's
Another
because,
last question.
yeah,
Okay.
sorry, because the audience of this channel is really big into historical board games and war games and stuff like this. And I was wondering, did as a player at any point in your life as a player, did you get interested in those heavy historical games or war games at any point, or you never really interacted with that part of the hobby?
Oh yes, in my early years, and for example, I studied for a while in the United States during my university career. I got deeply involved in longer games, in heavier games. I enjoyed them, and at that time I had more time. So I tried out the various genres, but I see where I'm currently drifting towards is the slightly easier games. It's also a matter of the market. I think there are lots of hobby designers who spend a lot of time on these very deep, very sophisticated, long games. And so it is competing on that market, and it's not so effective, because how do you reach really, I mean, the multipliers, they will glorify these games sometimes if they're very good. But if you look but the multipliers are not a true reflection of the market and the mankind you can reach. And so if you take simpler games, it is easier to reach people. And my motto very early till today is bringing enjoyment to the people. It's not about the money. It's not about reaching people. Of course, when you reach people, you sell many games. But it is really about this best reward as a game designer to say, okay, I have really contributed something positive. And there are very, very few real professions where you can say that. I was a banker before that, and people wanted loans, but they didn't love the loans. They wanted the loans to buy something. Yes. So, but here, what we create is really what people want, and I'm very grateful that we can be in that industry, and that I'm giving the chance to bring this enjoyment to the people.
Thank you very much, Reiner Knizia, for taking the time to answer my questions. Sorry we went over time, but thanks again for being here. It was a great conversation. And if at any point you want to explore again war games or longer historical games, I would be more than happy to do a rules teach and show you some of the newer stuff that are coming from that part of the hobby. There are interesting things happening, but and not all of it is taking 4 hours, I promise. But it was great to have you on. Good luck for Taj Mahal and all future projects. And I hope to have at some point the opportunity to talk to you again. Thank you very much and have a great day.
Thank you very much for opening the stage, and thank you for the interesting questions and the interrogation, which I enjoyed very much. So, a warm hello to all the players and the fans, and keep on playing, enjoy the games. Playing games makes the world better.
It does. Thank you very much, Reiner. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
So this was the discussion with Reiner Knizia. First of all, I wanted to thank again Dr. Knizia for the time that he spent with us. He was very kind. He took some extra time based on what we had originally planned. So I really appreciate that, because the discussion flowed quite naturally, and it was hard to keep it into that very short constraint. And he was about to go into that playtest session of this game that was a nice little announcement to have on the channel. So a bit of a sneak peek. I'm not sure he was allowed to say that. Maybe he's gonna have some problem with his publisher, but we'll see about this. But what did you think about the chat, Luis?
Oh, I think it was insightful. I mean, it doesn't hurt that he provided, sneak peek of a new game, Taj Mahal. Well, not a new game, but a new reprint of a game that's been. I think that was like Z-Man was the one that had like the last version of it. So
I'm not sure who had the right sliced. Yeah,
I owned that copy, and I don't know if that was the last one though, but because they had that one with Tigris and Euphrates and a few other games, which are now ridiculously expensive and hard to come by. So it's great to see the good doctor, having these games like come out again, and with more content, more ways of playing. So if you played that game a million times, then you can play it a million more.
Yeah.
Then if you like the expansions. The talk overall, I mean, I liked it. As people are probably aware, I wasn't there. It's like, oh wait, where's Luis in that? It's like it serves better, like you asking questions. You know, we've discussed the questions beforehand, you and I, the questions asked. So my presence was felt, but I felt that direct one-on-one was more effective
And you were in
and
the
also less
background.
annoying.
Just yeah, you were in the shadows because, as you said, we worked on the questions together. You were in the chat before and after, and you followed the discussion in the backstage. So for me, it's really feels like something that we did together. I was just the face of the project in a way. Yeah,
Yeah.
if that makes
Oh,
sense.
you have the good look, so you're the celebrity. You're the celebrity here.
Yeah, maybe
So,
not the good looks, but at least the recognizable face.
yeah.
And I was thinking, so we had a bit of a discussion on the historical part, which wasn't the major part of the discussion. We wanted mostly to talk about his career. How did he see the board game as a hobby evolve? Because from the moment he came to now, actually, he was part of a major change of the industry. But regarding the history specifically, what did you think? Personally, I wasn't surprised. I knew that there was this clear divide between different approaches to gaming and different approaches to history. But were there anything that surprised you or something that you noted that you think was of specific interest?
Not, I mean, when it comes to the history part, not necessarily. A lot of these things, if you look at other interviews that he's done, he's fairly. This is a specific point that he's done. I I was, I mean, not surprised, but it was great to hear him though discussing it though, and you did probe, I think more on that subject than I've heard before too. So um, he he obviously he looks at games from a perspective of there's something that he wants as many people as possible to play, and I think anything that could potentially get in the way of that, it's something that he's not even going to consider, which makes sense.
Yeah, and I think that was interesting because he makes the assumption that history is a vehicle to drive escapism and to drive the experience first and foremost. So it's really an aesthetical thing, and he wants his game to be played, as you said, as much as possible and provide as much enjoyment as possible. So in that sense, I really like the way he uses history, and it also limits the kind of maybe negative impact that you can have by delving into tropes or anything, because he's never going to approach things in a uncharitable, unfair, or heavily biased way. I think it's yeah, I guess there is definitely, probably, I haven't looked at all of his games, but some potential criticism in some of the depiction that you exist, but you're going to be really far away from something like Puerto Rico, for example. So
Oh
so
yeah,
that's the
yeah,
yeah,
you're not.
yeah, yeah,
I'm trying to. I mean, yeah, he has so many games. I haven't played all of them or even really know probably like half of them really, but I mean there's some notable stuff like El Dorado, for example. That's you're trying to circling around potentially like
yeah,
fraught waters or there. But I mean, besides that though, like all the themes are fairly like Tigris and Euphrates. It's like ancient civilization in Mesopotamia, and it's a lot of Egyptian themes. I was surprised of that. That is one thing I was surprised when he said that was his, I guess, his favorite historical theme. I know that it shouldn't be surprising when you look at his like oeuvre, but it
yeah.
is surprising him because you don't know how much of it it's like if it's like him actually wanting that theme or if it's the publisher
Or
tacking
the
on that
publishers, yeah.
theme on it. And we know like Egyptian themes are fairly are fairly popular because it's arguably the most recognizable globally as
Yeah.
well. It's um
And I think it was interesting, though. He said something that I was surprised by because, I often say that Euro game designers, it's mechanical first, theme after. And it was interesting to see that actually history could inspire him with game mechanics, not in the sense that he would want to visualize or to represent a system that would be a representation of history, but still like being exposed to history, being exposed to like going to a museum or reading a book or something like this could inspire him to come up with a game. And I thought it was interesting to see that history maybe inspired him in a different way, but still was a source of inspiration for his design. And it's really for me, it was really interesting to think about it this way. Like something can just strike you during an exhibition and you're like, oh, I want to show that. And I thought that was actually quite interesting. So it did introduce a bit of nuance in this statement that I usually make in between the distinction between historical game designer and Eurogame designer. So I thought that was really interesting, and I just love the energy of the guy. He's so kind, and I like the the bow tie, of course,
Bow tie,
and
the signature bow tie, yeah.
I also love this idea of just providing enjoyment, and I think it's it's a interesting and respectable objective. I think it's really great. So yeah, that was nice. Anything else in the discussion for you that stood up, maybe regarding the industry or something like this?
It's just great to hear from someone who, he's as close to a celebrity like that you're gonna have like within the space, who is still someone that you can approach like at a convention. You can. I mean, we were able to set this up. I mean, yeah, I have like my media links and everything, but still being able, we were able to set this up in pretty relatively like short time, and to see that it talks about like his enthusiasm for games. Obviously, he's getting marketing out of this too, but this is a fairly niche space. Um, so for
Yeah,
him to for for him
I
to
don't
like
think we
want
are
to have
gonna
this
drive.
call.
I don't think we are gonna drive any sales for his games at any like it's yeah, it's not
Yeah, but
like
that's not the point. Like the point
yeah
is to I always remember something that Jason Matthews talks about the so-called things like transatlantic game that he quotes from one specific a critic slash reviewer, which I don't remember the name, but Reiner Knizia has at his core his DNA of a designer. It's just the games are so mathematically rich and so stripped down to the bare essence of mechanics and what to do that there's a lot for designers to learn from I mean,
yeah
and when we're talking about a lot of conflict simulations, I mean, there's so much math involved when you're talking about like probability, and there's I want designers also to consider what can they take from somebody like Dr. Knizia, right, and like apply to their design. Because if the goal for you is to you're trying to simulate a historical event or draw attention to a historical event, um, I think it would service you to have mechanisms that not necessarily are simplistic for the sake of simplicity, but if you're trying to reach a wider audience with that event, which
yes,
has its
have a form
purpose.
of. I think he's a like he's the for me he's the ultimate elegant designer. So in a way,
Yeah.
he comes up like he gives in the sense that for me elegance in game design comes from the fact that you're going to give a very rich decision space for very low cognitive weight that you're giving on the player. And I
Hmm.
think on that he's really good. Like a game like Lost Cities, for example, is very simple. Like mechanically extremely simple, but the decision space is really rich. And I think this ratio between cognitive load and decision space, like I think Reiner Knizia is probably the most one of the most interesting designer without it being overwhelming. He's not opening the decision space too much because, like for example, Game of Go, that's the ultimate ratio. But the problem is that like the implication of this means that like the possibilities are so big that it's really hard to wrap your head around. He still manages to give you a space where yes the decision space is rich, but you more or less know what you can do and you don't feel too overwhelmed. Like you always strike that perfect balance and really that good gaming experience, like the kinesia quality of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, But I don't want to spend us for too much time like debriefing on the discussion. I thought I just wanted to get a bit your reflection after that. And maybe I had one question for you before we end this video is, do you have any other plans for me for interviews that you think would be interesting for me to do? You don't have to give specific names, but maybe specific directions of things that you would like us to explore later this year for people to know what to expect.
Yeah, I have a lot of plans. It's just let's see if they actually pan out, right? Yeah, maybe do more talks with like the intersection between like games and academia. Also move into more spaces just that are not exclusively analog games. Definitely historical and definitely quote unquote serious, but not necessarily just just tabletop stuff. So that's really, I can't say anymore. I have a few things planned, but like I said, I don't want to jinx myself.
Sure. But anyway, you've heard it here. We're going to explore quite a few things with Luis in 2024. We hope that you enjoy this first interview. I don't know if it should become a series or something like this, like Fred meets people. But it was great. Thanks for organizing this. I hope that you enjoy the show. And if you wish to support what we do here, you can donate on Ko-fi. That will give you access to the Discord server, but also that will also support the show, making sure that we can buy more material to make some content here. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day and see you very soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.